The Pelicans are following a league-wide trend by signing Kevon Looney in free agency. I'll tell you why it's a smart move, why there's one big-time concern about it, and how the Pelicans can keep reshaping the roster through trades. It's a Tuesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Tuesday, day after the Pelicans make a move in free agency, signing center Kevon Looney. We'll break down this deal, what it means for the Pelicans going forward, why they chose him, and how they're chasing a league-wide trend. But there is a big concern about it, and we'll get into that. That's going to need its own show in and of itself. We're also going to look at traded player exceptions, how the Pelicans can still keep making moves, even though they don't have any more money to spend, essentially. And then two Pelicans get extensions and why that's a great thing. That's all in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. Don't forget, you can watch us at 10:30 a.m. every weekday on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. So let's get into it. Kevon Looney signed by the Pelicans, making an early move in free agency on a 2-year deal worth $16 million. His first year's salary will start at $7.8 million, let's say. I think this move, Kevon Looney, is fine. I wouldn't call it an elite move or anything like that, but the Pelicans were definitely needing to add another big man. And Joe Dumars told us this post-draft that they were going to look to add some depth in the front court. Kevon Looney, someone I highlighted for y'all in yesterday's show, 6'9" center, has spent 10 years with the Golden State Warriors. Look, for a backup center who's going to play 15, 16 minutes per game, that's great. He's probably not a starter in my opinion. He might start, might not. It doesn't ultimately matter. This is your backup center, a guy that's going to play 15, 16 minutes. He played 15 minutes last season, 16 minutes the year before. That's about right for him. He's a big body that knows what he's doing, that is just not an offensive threat. There's no three-point shooting from him, but he's a good rebounder, averaging 4.5 points per game last season, 6.1 rebounds. He's really good on the offensive glass. He's an above-average defensive rebounder, and he's switchable. He can switch on the perimeter, so switching on screens means he fits right into the Pelicans' defensive scheme under head coach Willie Green. The other thing, from talking to a couple people with Golden State, I know a couple people over there, talking with people from the Golden State Warriors, they rave about him. They rave about him as a locker room presence. They love this guy and what he just brings to a team. He's been one of the veteran leaders for the Golden State Warriors the past couple of years, at times referred to towards me as the guy who kept the locker room together in some tough times. Jordan Poole played with him. Jordan Poole seemed really excited that the Pelicans have signed Kevon Looney here on a 2-year deal. So you get that veteran presence. This is a young team all of a sudden that's lacking some of that. Looney is kind of your veteran presence in the locker room, and by all accounts, he's fantastic at that sort of role. You know, he's going to be a really good mentor to Derik Queen, who's also a slightly undersized center, a tweener. Looney's really a 4 or a 5. He plays more 5 than 4, but he's kind of in between with his height at 6'9". You know, that's a little bit similar in terms of size-wise to Derik Queen. So getting the mentor for him here, I think is a pretty smart move. An $8 million annual average annual value for a backup center, totally fine. That's about right, and he's cheap. I think one thing worth keeping in mind, too, is you saw big men and centers go fast in the first couple of hours of NBA free agency. You know, this means there's a need for these type of players around the league. So say he doesn't work out here, or, you know, whatever reason, maybe the season's going south, and we hope it doesn't do that in New Orleans because they don't control their first-round pick. If that's the case, then you can always trade him a little bit later and you'll get something in return for him. So look, this isn't like an elite move. This is not the move that makes you a true contender or really necessarily like massively elevates the Pelicans, but it's a move they needed to make. I think it's a totally fine move. You'd give it like a B grade if you needed to do something like that. I like it for the team. I think it makes sense. There is one big concern in my opinion, however. Kevon Looney's a guy that Willie Green has coached before over at Golden State and is absolutely going to love. You need minutes for Derik Queen. You need minutes for the young guys to not get buried on the bench and get those minutes to develop and grow. It's going to come through playing. Kevon Looney's a guy that you could see Willie Green falling in love with and playing 30 minutes per game. He won't play 30 minutes per game because Looney can't play 30 minutes per game, in my opinion. He's never even come close to that at the NBA level, right? You know, the most minutes he's ever played in a game was 3 years ago at about 24 minutes per. He shouldn't even be getting 24 minutes. That means Derik Queen isn't getting the minutes that you want him to. That Misi isn't getting the minutes that you want him to. And I still have Misi as the starter over Looney. So you've got to be careful with Willie Green and what that could do to this team a little bit here. Do the young guys start? Are they key rotation pieces or not? You need them to be. You just mortgaged your future, or at least 1 year of your future, for these guys. You need to develop them, and you need them to be getting those kind of minutes. And Looney's the type of guy that maybe could preclude Derik Queen from doing that. If Queen struggles with some rebounding, struggles with defense, you still need him out there. And Looney, if he's out there playing 30 minutes per game or 25 minutes per game, whatever the number might be, and is giving you 5-6 points, but a good rebounding numbers, just roll with Misi at that point, right? Like that's what you need to do. But this is the type of player that Willie Green is going to love. And that's kind of a bad thing. You know, as the Pelicans are kind of attempting two timelines here, and that's going to be a show probably later in the week here. You never want to be doing that. And those two things are at odds with one another. Looney saw that up front firsthand in Golden State. You can't really do two timelines, and the Pelicans have put themselves in position to do that. It's really, really tough to do. So you've got to make sure that Looney isn't a guy that's taking minutes away from some of the younger players. You need to give Carlo Makovic a chance too, right? You need to have those kind of roles for these players. So you need to make sure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to development going forward. There needs to be a plan in place and not, we'll see how it goes kind of thing. You need to develop the young guys. Looney's signing could prevent some of that. That's the biggest concern to me about it. But look, it means they can run double bigs. And that's a league-wide trend right now. You saw it in the postseason. You need size. You need different kinds of bigs in the postseason to be able to win games. Looney gives you some size, a little bit undersized, but he's a tough rebounder. He defends, not elite, but tries hard. No, he's not a shot blocker. But again, they needed help on rebounding. Looney definitely adds that to the team. Overall, look, it's not an elite signing, but I like it. That's a smart piece of business, signing him to 2 years, $16 million. So now, as it stands when I'm recording this is 9:30 Central Time. The Pelicans are about $3.7 million under the luxury tax before Micah Parsons. We don't need to worry about him just yet. So what can they do? They need another guard, maybe some more wing depth. How are they going to go about doing this? I'm going to tell you what a traded player exception is and why that's going to potentially be a factor going forward for the Pelicans. We'll look at the money and the cap stuff that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the greens, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. So you're already following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned on the beach. I love using FanDuel for the Club World Cup right now. All of the great soccer matchups, fun teams playing one another, the top stars, and it's all taking place here in the U.S. It's a lot of fun. There's also new daily promotions and other fun ways to bet every single day, and it's super easy to use, fast to pay out, and even makes regular season games feel like must-watch events. So whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you're part of the action. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. New customers can bet just $5 and you're going to get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's $5 bet and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. And for your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there is no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, by the way, on Locked On Pelicans, if you listened to yesterday's show, if you're an everydayer, you notice I spent some time on Kevon Looney. So it was a realistic possibility for this team. So it's good to see them kind of get that piece of business done. They now stand about $3.7 million under the luxury tax. It is important to kind of keep an eye on the first apron too. They won't go that high. I don't think they're going to go above the luxury tax, but they're about $10.4 million from the first apron. They cannot go above the first apron. Kind of as simple as that. That's about $196 million in salary. The Pelicans are basically at 184.1 right now. So they've got some room to that. They're going to need to sign Micah Peavy. I think I called him Micah Parsons in the last thing. It's not a baseball player. I don't know why I know that name so much. And his is kind of weird, but they're $3.7 million as of today under the luxury tax. So they could spend that. They could go out and sign a guy for $3.7 million, let's say. They use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception to sign Kevon Looney. They have about $6.3 million of that left. They have the $5.1 million biannual exception too. So that's the money they could spend on guys in free agency if, no matter what. You can go into the luxury tax and make a move at the trade deadline to duck out under it if they really wanted to. So they could go above that luxury tax number, spend more than 3.7. They could spend the 5.1. They could spend the 6.3, and that would be fine. They're probably not going to do that. The way they're going to kind of operate going forward is likely through trades. And so you're looking at a couple of things here that I find kind of interesting. One, you can dump a player, maybe Jordan Hawkins or Jose Alvarado. Say trade him, bring no salary back. I think Alvarado could get you some sort, 2 seconds, a late first round pick, something like that. You could dump his salary. He makes, I think, let me pull up my books here. $4.5 million. You could add that to the 3.7. That gives you, what is that? $8.2 million. You could spend all of that then, and they'd have the ability to kind of get close to that in some capacity. So you could do that and use your exceptions to spend in free agency left. You could also, if you don't want to do that, because that would put you above the luxury tax, let's say, or get you close to it, you could then trade one of these guys. So either they're going to dump a player, or, if you dump the player and you need to get above, say, the 6.3 left of the mid-level exception, because that's what it is. And if you dump a player here, let's say Jose or Hawkins, right? You're looking at, call it $8.4 million to spend. You have something called a traded player exception. And a traded player exception is a way to kind of use some money, and you get them in unbalanced trades. So if you send out more money than you're bringing back, you get something called a traded player exception, which can allow you to just absorb a player into it, a TPE. The Pelicans have one that's going to expire on the 6th, so it's likely not going to work. That's the one from Jonas Valanciunas last year. That's $9.9 million. But they have a traded player exception from the Brandon Ingram trade. That's $13 million. They also generated one with Kelly Olynyk in that Wizards trade for about $13.5 million. So if you were to dump Jose Alvarado, get him off of the books, you have $8.2 million that you could bring in before you get to the luxury tax line. You could then trade for a player using a pick or something to absorb them into that traded player exception of Brandon Ingram, Jonas Valanciunas, or Kelly Olynyk. This is a way that they could just go get somebody that is more than they would have to spend in free agency, and truthfully, likely better. You could use all $13 million of that. And then try and duck the luxury tax a little bit later, right? That could get you another big like Robert Williams from Portland, I think. If you're looking for another guard, there's Cole Anthony, who's looking to be rerouted from the Memphis Grizzlies. There's potential there too, right? Kobe White is on the move potentially from the Chicago Bulls. That's a way to add a young kind of, guard if you wanted to do that. If Minnesota is looking to move on from Dante DiVincenzo, and if you're looking for some wing and backcourt help, he's making $12 million next year. That's how you acquire one of those guys. Essentially, this is how you acquire a player that costs now more than $6.3 million, because that's all you have left, the maximum to spend in free agency on one single transaction. So the Pelicans have ways to get other players, assuming they dump somebody before. And we're seeing Joe Dumars remake this roster in a vision that he likes more. This is kind of an example of a new regime coming in, not liking the players the old regime had, and getting rid of them, right? CJ McCollum was an example of that. We don't know how they feel about Yves Missi necessarily. That could add into it as well. Maybe they don't like Jordan Hawkins, who's shown that he can be kind of an inconsistent shooter through his first 2 years. We don't know how they feel about Herb Jones or Trey Murphy. You would hope they feel good about those guys because they're great players and fan favorites. But they're looking to reshape the roster. So, in some sort of sense, nobody is really safe here when it comes to it. I think it's a little bit too difficult to dump DeJounte Murray. And I do think DeJounte Murray kind of fits into the archetype or type of player that Joe Dumars would like. So I'm not thinking he's really going to end up moving a ton here. But you could dump one of those guys and then go and get a guy that you like more. It's going to cost you. They're going to use some draft assets to do kind of both these moves. You might need to use an asset to dump guys, potentially, maybe not. But if you're trading for one and absorbing them into a traded player exception where you don't send a player back out, you're going to need a pick. You got to send something to the other team in some capacity. You have to. That's a rule. So there's going to be something there that's, making it work. Depending on the player, that could be smart. That could be worth it. Absolutely, right? Jaden Ivey is a guy that has ties to Troy Weaver. Is he potentially going to be on the outs of Detroit, though I think they're going to end up keeping him? Could you go after him, let's say, right? If you want guys that are making a little bit less money, there's Jaden Harvey from the Dallas Mavericks that I think as a young guy that can be a shooting guard and has shown that he can shoot the three ball pretty well, and this team certainly needs to add shooting. I might have signed a 3-point shooting big over Kevon Looney, though I like the Looney signing enough. You need some more shooting on the team. Is Jaden Hardy that guy? Could you go and get someone like Simone Fontecchio from the Detroit Pistons too? Down shooting year last year, but before that he was shooting 42.6% on over 6 attempts per game. Those are really good numbers. He's a guy that's kind of cheap that could slot right into it. He's making next year $8.3 million. That's the type of player that makes, I think, a ton of sense. Gives you some wing depth. Hardy gives you some guard depth, what they're looking for, and he makes $6 million, likely meaning that he's not going to get traded because, he's kind of good and he fits what they need there in Dallas there. You have someone like Ayo Dosunmu, the point guard, shooting guard from the Chicago Bulls, who's making $7.3 million next season. That's someone who's shown the ability to shoot the 3-point shot at times. Again, down shooting year. But what are the Chicago Bulls doing? 2 years ago, he averaged 12.2 points per game, 40% shooting from three, along with 3.2 assists. Those are pretty decent numbers. He can be a backup point guard a little bit for you. So that's how you go and get a player basically making more than $6.3 million, which is all the Pelicans have left to spend in free agency. And free agency isn't like teaming with like really great guys right now. It's actually been kind of like a quiet free agent period because of all of that, I think. So dump a player, maybe Hawkins, maybe Jose Alvarado, mainly because like he's the guy you could get the most assets for. And they're looking to kind of retool some of those things. We don't know how they feel about Carlo Makovic, but he's making so little money, basically $2 million, him and Antonio Reeves each on the same amount next season. I don't think they're going to look to dump those guys just because they're so cheap. There's no real reason to do that. Okay, so you dump Carlo Makovic and it gives you $5.7 million to the luxury tax. That's not even above the amount you have in the mid-level exception. So it doesn't give you that kind of flexibility. It just doesn't change things enough for you when it comes to that. That's why you've got to look at Jose Hawkins, potentially Sadiq Bey, but I think that's a guy that they like and want to keep here. It's worth probably keeping him. I don't think he has a ton of value either, but if you were to get rid of his $6 million, you're looking at $9.7 million to the luxury tax. That's giving you $16 million to the first apron. All of a sudden, that kind of opens things up a little bit more, right? If we're talking $16 million guys next season, somewhere in that range, that's a Grayson Allen who, is annoying of a player as he is, that's a guy maybe you could go and get. There's Terrence Mann in that kind of area as well. Jonathan Isaac, though, I think they're going to keep him. But, Daniel Gafford, is that a name? PJ Washington, those are the type. Did Gafford sign an extension? I can't remember. Those are the type of players that all of a sudden it looks like you could potentially go and get. So it opens things up even more for you, I think. So that's where the Pelicans can kind of keep reshaping their roster. It's not going to be through free agency. I don't see them being players for Jonathan Kuminga, anything like that. I wouldn't even like that with this roster in the first place, I think. Remains to be seen what potentially happens. But, this is a group that they need to probably add something else to it, right? And I just saw Gary Trent Jr., as I'm recording this, is signing with the Milwaukee Bucks return. Like, he would have been a guy to go and get. They don't have the money for him right now, and $7.5 million. But you couldn't create some space to be able to do those kind of moves. And I think that would be smart if you're the Pelicans to try and go and do. Let me know what you think. Is there a guy in those names that I threw out there that you like? Is there someone in that I didn't mention that you think they should go and get? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So coming up next, this one's kind of fun. Extensions for two key Pelicans. Key Pelicans, in my opinion. You know who I'm talking about, right? It's not a player. It's Joel Myers and Antonio Daniels. Let's talk about the broadcast that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network as well, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. For your second listen, though, it's Locked On Saints. Mini camps have just been announced. Where are they going to be? What's open to the public? Ross Jackson of the Locked On Saints podcast, covering everything black and gold. Make him your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So there are extensions, and I'd heard about this last week, coming for two key Pelicans, but they're not players. Joel Myers and Antonio Daniels have signed contract extensions for the television broadcast here on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. For immediate release, I'm going to read you the press release here. The Pelicans announced that the team has signed multi-year contract extensions with television play-by-play announcer Joel Myers and color analyst Antonio Daniels, solidifying one of the NBA's most dynamic and respected broadcast duos. Myers and Daniels have been the voices behind the Pelicans TV broadcast since 2019. I'm excited about this. I think these are both just great guys. Joel Myers has been with the team for 14 years now, by the way, which is pretty wild to think about. This will be Antonio Daniels' 7th season with the team. Truthfully, Joel's about as good of a pro's pro as there is out there. Also just a great person. If you ever get a chance to talk to him, do it. He will tell you all sorts of incredible stories. And look, he's great on the broadcast. He knows what he's doing. He's funny. He's entertaining. He enjoys it. He loves New Orleans. He loves being here. It's great to see the Pelicans lock in two key guys that just make being a fan more enjoyable, in my opinion. I've become friends with both of them, so I'm a little bit biased here. But I think they just make the broadcast more enjoyable. I remember, hearing Joel Myers call Pelicans games in Summer League, being like, man, it'd be really great if they could get him. And then boom, the next season they actually did, which was really cool to be able to see and hear. And he's been great on the broadcast, and I love it. Antonio Daniels, in my opinion, could be a rising star. You could see a national network pick him up potentially to be their second or third team. I think he's that good. He processes the game so quickly and then explains it in just simple, easy to understand terms that make you a smarter basketball fan. He's a good friend of Locked On Pelicans. You've seen him on the show over the years pretty regularly. We'll probably try and get him on pretty soon, I think, too, just to talk about what he sees coming for this team and, what the plans are for the broadcast and everything on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. This is smart. Again, make the broadcast enjoyable, make the fan experience enjoyable, and Joel Myers and Antonio Daniels Absolutely do that. AD in particular, I think, is such a great ambassador for the team, engaging with fans, willing to talk on social media, in spaces in the past, wherever it might be. Antonio Daniels is really willing to engage with folks in a way that you don't see a lot of broadcasters do. And I think that makes him so special. And look, he does it in a respectful way. So many people are just like, if you disagree with their opinion, they come at you and things like that. He's willing to engage and go back and forth with you and hear you out and listen to you. He disagrees with me plenty. I disagree with him at times. And we have great discussions about it, at the arena before and after games all the time. So I love that he just kind of brings that kind of engagement. It feels like both he and Joel, but particularly Antonio Daniels, are part of the community. They're Pelicans fans too, and I think that comes across in the broadcast, and I just very much enjoy hearing both of them, watching them. When there's a national TV game on, I try and make sure I get the local broadcast, especially if it's an away game, right? And you're watching it on League Pass or something like that. Why get anyone other than Joel and AD? Why? There's no point in doing that. Listen to those two guys. So seeing them sign multi-year extensions, keeping them locked in here to New Orleans, I absolutely love. By the way, Andrew Lopez, also friend of the show, is going to be returning for his second season as the TV sideline reporter. He's been on Locked On Pelicans before. I've known him for 15 years now. He's absolutely fantastic on there. Brings really great insight. I was just impressed for his first rookie year, basically doing constant TV. I thought he was great. So I enjoy him on the broadcast as well. So I'm excited that just everyone is back and Pelicans doing the smart thing of running the broadcast group back, making it more fun to be a fan of the New Orleans Pelicans. So more to come here this week on Locked On Pelicans. Are they approaching this from a two timelines thing? Is that a problem? Is Willie Green going to be a problem when it comes to that? We'll see. We'll talk about it here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we'll have more. There's going to be other moves for the team. There's certainly going to be another trade or two. We'll see. We'll see what they end up doing. But it's definitely not a boring off season. And we're going to be covering it here. We told you about Kevon Looney, right? I got other inside info that I want to share with you. I want to really do a deep dive on Jeremiah Fears, Derik Queen as well. We got a whole lot more to come. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate you, as always, watching and listening, and I'll see y'all next time.